Hello and welcome once again to LatveriaLibrary, where I go over some of my favorite comic book stories, characters, and lore. Today we continue our journey through Hell with part 7 of my Hellblazer retrospective. In the last video, John had split his soul in two, purging his darker side and creating a clone to fool the first of the fallen and save his friend's son. But what he soon is about to realize is that that type of powerful magic always costs a heavy price. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video, and let's just get into issue 102, the beginning of Paul Jenkins' difficult beginnings. Well, in John's own words, it would seem he's buggered things up again. Ever since purging his darker half and sending it to hell, it's felt like something has been missing. John's tried to ignore it, pretend it was just a natural reaction, but lately, things have gotten much worse. It's as if he's in this constant dreamlike state, unable to tell where it ends and reality begins. He's become sluggish, like nothing matters anymore, and the only conclusion he could muster was that he was no longer part of the grand design. The fact was, there are two sides to every person, a darker half and a lighter. One cannot live without the other. Just like order and chaos, a balance must be maintained between the two. John had broken the rules of the universe after purging his dark half, and now reality was running away, leaving him in the dust, which is why he's visiting an old friend, hopefully to find a way to catch back up. John sat down in the back of the restaurant across from his old friend Wong. The smell of wonton soup and French cigarettes surrounded him in fond memories which relaxed our hero, making it much easier to tell his story. He begins explaining everything to Wong. Everything he could remember at least, starting with Newcastle and the Demon Blood, to his rivalry with the First of the Fallen and splitting his soul in two. Of course his old friend didn't believe him, thought he was telling some kind of crazy joke, but nonetheless, still humored him. Wong tells John he must flip a coin and leave it up to I Ching, which is kind of a form of guidance or decision making. It will tell Constantine where he needs to go. So he flips the coin, and right away Wong was horrified by what he saw. He tells John he's made a big mistake. What he did was stupid and dangerous, and to fix it, he must listen to the I Ching. First was Earth, somewhere he's already been. Next is Thunder. He must listen to the thunder, and discover what he's tried to forget. After is Water. He must go there to relearn what he one time knew about evil. And last is two possibilities. The mountain, if balance has been found, or fire, the darkening of the light. John was now the coin. He must throw himself into the air and see where he lands. So he got on a bus, leaving chance to guide him. 200 miles later, he finds himself on a street and begins walking with a distant feeling still there, like he was standing still while the world moved forward just out of focus. His feet aching from all the walking, being the only reminder he's still here in the physical world. Until he stopped and lit a cigarette and felt a cold breeze on his neck. Gradually it became stronger and colder, breaking him out of his dreamlike state, making him aware of his surroundings once more. At the same moment, a roll of thunder could be heard coming from the other side of a hill nearby. John moved towards it and began to climb, and when he reached the other side, immediately he knew where he was. The first stop on his journey, the place of thunder, Ravenscar Asylum. The one place he promised to never come back to. But if Constantine wants to be whole again, he needs to confront the darker parts of his past, aka Mr. Dalton Brewer, the man in charge and who made John's life a living hell. This guy was an extra evil bastard. Every day John would be subjected to electroshock therapy induced by Brewer himself. What was really sick though, was that Brewer enjoyed it. He wanted John to acknowledge the pain in any way, but our hero never did, too absorbed in the ghost of his past to care about anything else at the time. And now, here standing face to face with the man again has helped him remember how it all felt. So John had now been to his place of Earth and found his thunder. The next stop on his journey of rediscovery is his place of Water. Constantine once again let I Ching take the wheel, leading him halfway across the country, first to a bar and a man named Keith, then to a little house on a beach where one of the evilest men you could meet resides, Trevor Pritchard. In 1978, a 19-year-old girl was found dead, throat slit and disemboweled. She was the 7th victim of an unknown serial killer. A detective named Bill Ferguson was lead investigator on the case, and for 3 years he had exhausted all his leads, chased every red herring with nothing to show for it, until now. Right after the 7th victim was discovered, Bill received a tape from the killer. He'd been totally convinced this tape was authentic, mainly out of desperation. You see, finding this butcher had become his reason for existing. So, 10,000 hours of manpower and a reward of £1 million later, and once again, nothing to show for it but another dead girl. This was all because of Trevor Pritchard. All this time, and he's never breathed a word to anyone, completely getting away with what he's done until now. Chance had led John to Trevor's little shack on the beach. He knew what the man did, but needed to know more if he was going to become whole again. Luckily, Trevor was more than happy to spill his guts. He has hid this secret for so long and was bursting at the seams to brag about it. He tells John he used to be an actor in his younger years. A good one, in fact. Could have even made it on television if he had known the right people. Regardless, Trevor still wanted to prove to himself that he could. So he sent that tape to the police claiming to be the butcher. Of course the police believed him and spent the next 6 months hunting for someone who had nothing to do with the murders. After the final girl, it was obvious the police had been following a false lead, which led to the lead investigator, the man who made it his life's mission to catch this killer, Bill Ferguson, to take his own life. He just couldn't forgive himself for being conned by the tape. Trevor seemed quite pleased with himself. In fact, it was written all over his smug face. And it took everything John had not to knock that look off. He reminded himself it wasn't why he was there. His goal was to study Trevor and relearn what he had forgotten about wickedness and spite. He figured his job was done now, coming to the conclusion this man is nothing but a coward hiding behind insanity. But before he leaves, John had a little surprise for old Trevor. Remember Keith? Well, it turns out Keith was a son of Bill Ferguson, and it just so happens he had brought the young man with him. Constantine tells Trevor not to worry at the moment because Keith was under hypnosis. He won't remember John after he's gone, but he will remember everything he had just heard. On his way out, John snaps his fingers, waking up the hypnotized Keith, leaving the two men to, let's say, work out their issues. And so, what has John learned so far? Well, he's a shell of his former self who lacks direction, and that the copulation of evil is just a form of cowardice. The mountain was next, and hopefully last. Chance had brought John to the bottom of Ben Makadu, a mountain with many horrifying rumors of demons, witches, and ghouls, the manifestation of personal terrors, and the embodiment of all the world's evil, donning the name Grey Man. The funny thing was, John believed all of this. As our hero climbed the dark, lonely mountain, his fear of isolation intensified. He pretended he wasn't afraid, but it just made whatever was up there with him angry. He began to hear the skittering of footsteps and felt an overwhelming surge of evil. John turns to face it and realized it was himself he felt standing behind him. His other half he sent to hell, who I will refer to as Dark John. Dark John greets his other half and begins telling of his time in hell, how he's tried to make the best out of the situation despite the half of Crowley inside of him constant screaming. He spent the majority of his days drinking and smoking as he explored all corners of the fiery realm, but also had learned a few things while down there. Actually, everything as he tells it, and learning more every day. Despite being stuck, it seemed like he was enjoying himself, but now he wanted to know what John was doing here, even though he already knew the answer. He just wanted to hear it out loud. John says he wants to get back together, but this probably wasn't a good idea. Dark John explains that one day as he was out by the tar pits trying to make sense of his place in all this, because for some reason, the rules don't apply to him in hell. Basically, he can do whatever he wants. When suddenly, he's approached by the first of the fallen, yelling about how Dark John wasn't the real Constantine, and that one day, he will get them both. He had nothing but time. So Dark John figures it would be best to stay apart so that won't happen. He then throws John a condom of all things, in which he was confused about at first, but put two and two together fairly quickly. After Dark John wandered off back to Hell, the real Constantine began his trek towards his place of fire, which of course was Hell, but a very special place in Hell where neither the First nor his minions could reach. Our hero journeyed through a long winding cave until he reached a large room engulfed in fire. In the middle of the flames, he could make out a figure of the person he was here to see, Ellie. She was shocked to see the chain-smoking mage after how they had left things, and asked what he was doing here. So John explains that he just couldn't live with himself knowing what he had done to her, unleashing the First of the Fallen back on Hell. He had made a mistake, and was here to ask for her forgiveness. This lonely failed succubus that fell in love with an angel, a secret that nobody knows but John. It made her the perfect target for his manipulation. Hell, John didn't even really have to do much. He just told her he was in love with her, and it was all over from there. Ellie's emotions began to boil to the surface. She could not resist anymore. She wanted the chain-smoking con man, and couldn't wait any longer. John could taste the charcoal malice and spite on her demon breath. It was the parts of his soul he was missing flowing back into him. He fought back the waves of nausea that came with it, until finally, he was flushed with evil once again. And honestly, it felt good. Afterwards, Ellie turns to look at John, and right away the woman's side of her could feel it. The man had played her. The incredible anger she felt at that moment made her drop her effeminate facade, exposing what she truly was. An ugly monstrosity lumbering over our hero, which would terrify most men. But Constantine was calm and cool because he had actually beaten her a long time ago. Remember the masking sigil he had cut into her soul? Well, to be on the safe side, John had mixed some of his own blood into the symbol, which means if he dies, the sigil breaks, making it so the First can find her once again, a fate worse than death. John had told her at that time that one day he would collect the debt he was owed, and today was that day. Although, he had a feeling that this didn't make them even, and eventually would probably cost him a great deal. But today, his soul was whole again. He had beat another devil, and lived to tell the tale, so he was feeling pretty good at the moment. Now it would seem John Constantine is back to his old self, and his journey to become a better person was no more than purging of his darker half. Even so, I thoroughly enjoyed this story, and that ending was shocking to say the least. But I have a feeling John was right when he said that it would cost him. I think this is far from over, but for now, let's skip a few issues to 108 and 109, a setup to the next big story arc. The barrier between worlds is breaking, allowing the fairy realm to bleed through. And it all starts in issue 108, The Days of Wine and Roses. Today is the perfect day for an orgy, but not to partake. Truth is, John is only attending the legendary Simon Harcourt's party to blackmail its variety of wealthy and powerful guests. But you might be wondering how out of all people this slippery mage was able to procure an invite. Well, it was much easier than you would imagine. It was simply talking himself up in all the right places, making sure to add that now he specialized in non-orthogenital fertility rituals, which of course was not a real thing. The rich are always the easiest to fool, next to demons. Not long after, a gold envelope was slipped under John's front door, with a letter inside inquiring if he may be able to help one of the secret party's valued members. Which brings us to the present. He set up outside by a large fountain as requested by Simon. The party was actually more dull than John would have thought, with the only form of entertainment so far being some former gymnastics champion. But he figured that's the reason he was invited, so he better make a show of it. He began his magical chant, which was really the ingredients on a package of Metamucil, when suddenly Simon began to morph into some kind of plant creature. It says to John, "You are the calling we heard on the vine." Apparently, somehow, those ingredients he was reciting had called a couple of Mindu. I think that's how you say it. He and she of the wine and flower. They are basically the embodiments of plant essence, like Jack from my previous video during the Critical Mass arc. While he explains all this to John, she was on her own journey to help a young girl with her evil controlling father. After, John tells he to piss off because he doesn't belong here, and in return, the creature spits wine in the con man's face and says, "They will be where they choose. We are all coming back. All of us." In time, John will know what this means, but for now, it is enough that he knows they exist. In ages long past, these creatures commanded respect, and because humanity now have no respect for anything or anyone, is the reason they all must return. And with that, as quick as he appeared, he was gone. As was his wife, leaving the little girl surrounded with pieces of her father scattered throughout the room. And now, on to issue 109, and more context to whatever is coming. It all started last month, around the time of the orgy. Weird things had been happening on Chaz's uncle's farm. It first started with crops damaged and dying, thinking maybe it could have been a chemical seepage from a plastic company nearby. But then, they began to find mutilated corpses of their cattle, like one of those stories of little green men you hear about on documentaries. Gradually, things continued to get even weirder throughout the month, leaving Chaz and his uncle no other option but to recruit someone who had experience with the weird. John laughed it off at first, making jokes about sheep staggers from Venus. But there had been this reporter that had been harassing him since the day after the orgy, even following him into the bathroom. And as hot as she was, there was no way he would spill the beans to any nosy reporter. So the best course of action was to help out Chaz and lay low for a while. It was a long drive, but the two finally arrived at the farm in North Yorkshire. Uncle Wilf wasted no time, right away bringing out pictures of the mutilated sheep. He explains that there was no way it could have been a dog or a wolf that did this. The wound gave off an unusual smell that he did not expand upon. Also, the wounds on the femur were so precise that it looked to be severed with a laser beam. And this wasn't the only one. Within a month, this had happened to 12 other sheep, not to mention the crops dying, and just last week, 2 of his dogs went missing. Uncle Will felt as if something was wrong, like an illness had seeped through and infected the land, and he wasn't the only one that felt this. Uncle Will's son Phil had suddenly become deathly ill, like something was changing him. Something evil. The old man luckily had proof to some of his claims. He led John around to the back of the house where a goat that was killed just last night lay. Its guts had been squeezed like jam out of a donut and gave off an unusual foul odor that could only be described as rotting metal, which is what solidified to John what they were dealing with. A real bona fide werewolf. Of course, Uncle Wilf didn't believe him, and John didn't blame him either. The whole thing seemed insane, but unfortunately true. There was no doubt, you see. John had felt this sensation before, smelled that rotting metal odor as well. It happened years ago at the club. John was young then, spent most of his time there doing tricks for the young rich pricks at the wine bar, hoping to impress and maybe make some more powerful connections. While he would do this, there would always be this one older gentleman sitting in the corner every night, always alone, never speaking a word. John was curious and determined to prove himself, so one night he strolled over to the gentleman. He recalled the odd aroma the man gave off like rotting chewing gum wrappers, as he leaned forward and said, "I wonder when you might join me, John." He then began to recount this story of a disease that appeared in Europe before the time of record keeping. Those who carried this plague were isolated from the rest of the public, but even so, the mistrust between the people grew greater because the plague did not kill the carrier. It made them live forever, which made it even harder for them to tell who had it, since they never looked sickly. Constantine could tell this man was telling the truth. There was this conviction in his voice, like he had been there, seen it. And for some reason, this gentleman blamed John for it all. Hopefully we will find out why later. Even after telling the story, the old man still didn't believe John. Not that it mattered at the moment, because something the old man said just hit our hero like a ton of bricks. The man's son Phil was apparently sick, and the 2 dogs that were killed were his. Constantine knew what was happening now. He could smell the disease in the Yorkshire air, and quickly followed it through the woods near the farm. Finally, after all these years, maybe he would get answers to whatever that old man meant. He stopped for a moment to focus on the direction of the stench. He shut his eyes tightly and heard the quick rumble of hooves. Before he could act, they were already on him. 3 large werewolves on horseback circled the con man, blocking off his way of escape. There was nothing more for John to do but sit back and await his fate. But he suddenly noticed something. The pack kept a respectful distance away. He then looked up and saw it in their eyes. The wolves were afraid. But of what exactly? One begins to approach. It was Wilf's son, Phil. He said, "They won't hurt you. None of this is their fault." All over the world, wolves, spirits, and fairy folk were being ripped out of their realm. But the problem was, there was no room for them in ours. He continued to explain that something important was happening, but he could only make out pieces, and none of it made any sense. He noticed it in the crops the day before he got the sickness. It was as if everything was dying, and it was up to John to make it right. John was confused. All of this was a lot to take in. Plus, why was it up to him to fix this? But the werewolf never answered, instead asking John not to tell his father what had happened to him, as they all rode off, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Constantine did as he asked, explaining to Wilf that more than likely the boy had caught a sexually transmitted disease and needed to get away for a few days. Which really didn't sit right with John, but what else was he supposed to do? Plus, everything Phil had told him, he figured it was a good time to forget it all in a bottle of Johnny Walker, which then led him to the reporter's front door, and then to her bed. And with that, this is where this video ends. I cannot wait for the next part. I'm a sucker for a good monster story. Werewolves, vampires, fairies, the more the better. So I will be working on that video right away. Now, for everyone who's made it this far, I just want to apologize for this video being a little bit shorter and taking so long. You see, I've had some medical issues, nothing major, but it's really hindered the video making process. But to make it up to you, I know how much you guys love these Hellblazer videos, so I will be working on the next one right away. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and turn on notifications if you enjoy the video, and I'll see you in a couple weeks for the Last Man Standing arc.